There's a debate whether these things should be called negligent discharges or unintentional discharges. I'd like to hear what y'all have to say about that. We are the Armed Attorneys. Have you ever shown your gun off to a friend, or maybe you had to clean your gun, or perhaps doing some quick draw exercises? Well, this video is for you. We're talking about what to do right after a negligent discharge. Is there a duty to report it to law enforcement? Should you even call the police? And can you repair the damage right after a negligent discharge? Those are the three most common scenarios we see come up, and these are all the questions that we have related to negligent or unintentional discharges. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And today's video is brought to you by our friends at American Hartford Gold. As part of the firearms community, one lesson's clear. Relying on the government for protection, whether it's your life or wealth, is not smart. And unfortunately, the current state of affairs is not ideal. With soaring inflation, major economies abandoning the dollar, bank failures, and talks of a government control through the digital dollar.
Having a plan to safeguard your life savings from failing corporations and currency conflicts is crucial. That's where American Hartford Gold comes in, a precious metal dealer we trust. They can guide you in diversifying your wealth portfolio with physical gold and silver. They offer incredible products, customer service, and have a 5-star rating with thousands of reviews and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. On top of that, they support the channel and have an incredible offer to share.
When you contact American Hartford Gold, tell them that the Armed Attorney sent you, and they'll give you up to $5,000 of free silver on your first order. To learn more, text attorney to 65532 or call 866-856-2380 or check out the link in the description below. And today's video is also brought to you by our friends at Sonoran Desert Institute. They have online gunsmithing and armor courses to take your hobby to the next level. sdi.edu/arm-attorneys. Now, I don't know what's in the air or what's going on with the phases of the moon, but there seemed to be a tremendous uptick of negligent or unintentional discharges. We can have that debate in the comment section. What is the correct term? But what is going on? Let's start with some basics first, because this is so avoidable.
Well, yes. And of course, anytime we discuss negligent discharges or gun safety in general, we always should reiterate the 4 rules of gun safety. Number 1, always treat every firearm as if it is loaded. Number 2, always keep your firearm pointed in a safe direction and never point it at anything you're not willing to destroy. Number 3, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to discharge the weapon. And number 4, always know your target and what is behind your target.
Yeah, but those 3 examples that we gave in the intro, showing a gun off to a buddy, practicing some quick draw exercises, or cleaning a firearm, those are the 3 I'd say that probably makes up 80% of negligent or unintentional discharges that we see in our practice. You know, this is just like going to the range to be proficient, and then you talk to instructors, they say it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you have your unintentional or negligent discharge. I think a lot of people fail to prepare or think about these things in advance. So let's get our minds in the right spot, start thinking about what we should do should we find ourselves in this scenario. And so let's go with this first one. What do you do right after a negligent discharge?
Well, one thing you should do is you should obviously go look at the entry place where the bullet actually entered into something, a window, a door, a cabinet, a wall, and then look for, of course, the exit. Now, we're assuming that you are discharging it in your own home or apartment.
Yeah, that's where most of them occur.
Yes. And so obviously, if you have a negligent discharge outdoors, it's going to be very difficult for you to trace that bullet. And certainly you would not want to have a negligent discharge in a public place.
Yeah.
So first thing, find out where that bullet went.
Yeah. And the second thing that comes up is law enforcement likely to come to the attention of the negligent discharge? You know, if you live out in a house out in the country and you shot it into the floorboards and there's nothing but foundation below you, the chances of somebody else getting hurt or somebody else coming to the attention and law enforcement coming out and investigate, very low. You live in a big city with paper thin apartment walls and it goes through the wall, I'd say the chances are a little bit higher. And then always, if anytime anybody's injured, obviously you want to call 911 and request emergency medical services. But I'd say that kind of brings us to the next question. Is there a duty to report? I'm not aware of any state that requires you report a negligent discharge absent somebody getting injured.
Correct. I don't believe there is. However, in the plethora of new gun proposals, whenever the anti-gun legislators want to make things more onerous, more oppressive for gun owners, I can certainly see that they would make a duty report. Now, obviously, there are many states that have had proposals that they have duty to report stolen guns. So logically speaking, why wouldn't they have a duty to report that you have a discharge. Now, of course, this violates your Fifth Amendment rights not to incriminate yourselves. I mean, if the legislatures are so hot to trot that people will be so anxious to self-report themselves, why don't they make a duty to report when you rob a bank?
Sure.
Why don't they make a duty to report whenever you abuse your wife? Why don't they make it a duty to report whenever you DWI? You
Sure.
get home and you're like, hey, police, I just DW'd. I just thought I'd tell you. I mean, it's an absurd proposal to create a duty report. However, as we know, legislators love to live in the land of absurdity when it comes to gun laws.
So, nobody injured, not likely to come to the attention of law enforcement. Those are the scenarios a lot of times, and each case is going to be different. Always consult with an attorney in your state. But those are the scenarios where I'm going to tell most of my clients, like, hey, don't tattle on yourself. There's no duty to report. Nobody's hurt. Nobody's going to figure this out unless you go and spill your beans to the cops.
Yeah, a lot of people, obviously, they do get a little weirded out because it does involve a gun, and guns have this sort of taboo aura around them. But just think of it whenever I've talked to people about negligently discharging and destroying their own property, is think of it as a chainsaw. It's not illegal to take a chainsaw and just cut up your own furniture.
Sure.
It's not illegal to take a chainsaw and chop down your own front door. And so it is not illegal to destroy your own property, regardless of what tool you use to do that with.
So that'll inform that kind of second critical question. Should you call the police? Somebody's injured. Clearly, yes, we want to report it to law enforcement. If it's likely to come to the attention of police, going back to our example of you live in an apartment, went through your wall, you can see through the hole, you can see your neighbor's TV on. Guess what? Your neighbor probably is not just going to let the hole in the wall go. They're probably going to call the police. And so those are those scenarios where I'm likely telling my client, hey, we should go ahead and probably report this. Also, you don't know if the person's dead on the ground or something like that. I mean, you want to get help to them.
Sure, if there's something obvious like that. But let me tell you a story. So
Sure.
years ago, I had a guy, he called in. He was in an apartment. It amazes me how many negligent discharges take place in an apartment. I don't know if it's because young people live in apartments. I don't know if it's because uh, people who are maybe less sophisticated with firearms live in apartments, but there seems to be a disproportionate amount of negligent discharges that happen in apartments. So this guy, sure enough, he lived in an apartment. He had a negligent discharge. It went through his wall, went out into the common hallway, and hit the wall across the hallway from him. And he was asking questions. I said, well, did anybody say that they heard it or saw you do this? No. Well, the next day he gets a note on his door from a police detective that says, hey, this bullet hole in this wall has been reported. It looks like it came from your apartment. Please contact me to make a statement. So the guy called me. I told him, do not under any circumstances make a statement to this police officer. I called the police officer to inform him that he was my client. He would not be making a statement. And the police officer spent about a month or two basically calling me, thankfully, to harass me about how he was going to issue a warrant for my client, regardless of whether he came in to make a statement. And I just said, look, he's not making a statement. If you want to issue a warrant, go ahead. Called his bluff. Nothing happened. And we are well past the statute of limitations on that now.
Yeah. And that's one of those deals where, most of these unintentional or negligent discharges take place when you're the only person around. And I mean, when it comes to investigating a crime, unless there's some other witness to this, most of the time the police can only figure this out if you tattle on yourself. Now, this can come in a lot of different ways. Just him saying, yes, I'm the only one who lives here, or nobody else comes to my apartment, or yes, I have a gun, or, any of these innocuous kind of beating around the bush questions, those could lead to probable cause for maybe an arrest warrant or something else. So it's really important. You find yourself in this situation, you're not talking to anybody, but obviously you want to talk to a lawyer first.
Yes. So in your time as a tool for the totalitarian state.
All right.
How many times did you have cases where you prosecuted people solely on the basis that they had made incriminating statements against themselves?
A lot. A lot. And you look at this, most of the time, and if you don't talk to the cops, most crimes, the police can't just figure it out just based on the physical evidence. Somebody has to talk to the police. And so this is one of the scenarios where keep your mouth shut, speak through an attorney, because what an attorney says can't be used against you. So And that's really, really important. Now, another question that comes up frequently is, can you immediately repair the damage after a negligent discharge? This is going to depend on your state, but what most states have is some kind of tampering with evidence law that says, if you know that an investigation is proceeding or in progress, if you were to hamper or conceal evidence or, change the physical characteristics of the scene, that might be a crime in and of itself. So, going back to our example, alone in your house out in the middle of the woods, shoot into the ground. Well, do you have any reason to believe that, the police are investigating this? No. Go ahead, fix your floor, right? You have a negligent discharge and I think Emily had a client that he accidentally shot himself in the adult area. The police investigating, he also had some damage. I mean, depending on the circumstances, you have one of these things where maybe you call 911 on yourself, or that the neighbors have called 911. If you start trying to putty up the walls or to replace windows or things like that, that could be tampering with evidence.
Oh, yeah. Like in the example that I just gave, whenever that guy found that card from the detective on his door, if he would have started making repairs to his bullet holes at that point, he absolutely would have been opening up himself to a charge of tampering with evidence.
Yeah.
But prior to finding that card, he had no idea that there was going to be any police investigation for that. And so he could have attempted to repair that damage.
Yeah. This is another case that we had where bullet went out their front window of their house, couldn't locate where the bullet landed. I mean, we all just assumed it hit a tree or something like that. Gave the client green light to replace the pane in the window pane. About 2 weeks later, the police came by to investigate. Hey, we're investigating this bullet hole we found in a house. You mind if we take a look around? Client consented. The police looking at his front window, he had replaced the window. Good to go, you think, right? Well, they pull back his curtain and there's a perfect little bullet hole in his curtain. So if you're going to consent to searches, first off, you shouldn't have consented to a search. But if you're going to be making repairs to this stuff before an investigation is proceeding or in progress, let's do it the right way.
Yes. And also, since this is an accident, since this was not an intentional act, even if you damage somebody else's property, you have the ability to go over to them and negotiate with them about repairing the damages yourself. So again, it's the same as, let's say that you're backing out of your driveway and you happen to run over your neighbor's mailbox.
Right.
Go to your neighbor, offer to pay for it, offer to fix the mailbox. No duty to report that you ran over the mailbox. Get it done. Hopefully your neighbors will be reasonable, and that's all they want is that their property fixed. They don't want to see their neighbor, charged with a crime. Or perhaps you live in a neighborhood where you got really bad neighbors, and they do want to see you charged with a crime.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot of crimes that folks can be charged with, and generally, in these cases, in most states, the requisite mental state is typically recklessness. So you have to be aware of a substantial and unjustifiable risk, and you disregard it, and you decide, I'm going to do this anyway. So you can see that in most of those scenarios that we talked about, that doesn't sound like a negligent or unintentional discharge, but that doesn't keep the cops from arresting people. So what are the crimes that folks get charged with? All types of disorderly conduct, deadly conduct, discharging towards houses, discharging towards cars, shooting across roadways, discharging within city limits. I mean, there's a million different crimes that the police can scrape together if they really want to charge somebody.
Right. And sort of the difference between recklessness and negligence. Negligence is a true accident. Oops, what happened? I didn't mean to do that. Something reckless would be as if you were, say, target practicing in your backyard. And you were target practicing, so you were engaging in an activity, but you were reckless about that activity, about whether or not your bullet would go through the backstop, go through a fence, hit a neighbor's piece of property, something like that. So reckless activity usually involves some sort of voluntary act, whereas an act of negligence is a pure accident.
Yeah, but apart from, following the firearm safety rules, there are other ways to kind of mitigate or reduce the likelihood that, serious bodily injury, death, or property damage comes from this. I have a buddy who keeps a bucket of sand next to his workbench, and after he cleans his gun, or, if he's wanting to confirm that something is empty, he's pointing it at this bucket of sand. There's lots of things that you can do, but those are the scenarios that come up most frequently. If you're showing your gun off to a buddy, you really need to take the extra step. I'd say that's probably the most common one that I see. Second, cleaning. Third, practicing, quick draw drills.
One thing I will say, before you show anybody a firearm, just clear it, drop the magazine, lock the slide back. You know that you're you're safe and you're clear at that point.
Yeah, but there's a whole lot to this. The other thing I want to hear is there's a debate whether these things should be called negligent discharges or unintentional discharges. I'd like to hear what y'all have to say about that, but we hope you enjoy this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video. And we'll see your questions and comments in the section down below. And until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.